Hey folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board. I hope you all are enjoying your Memorial Day, and I brought you a little something special today. This is the complete collected edition of Willie and Joe by Bill Mauldin. If you've never heard of Bill Mauldin, I'm not surprised. I hadn't until I got this for Christmas one year. This is a collection of comics done by cartoonist Bill Mauldin, and he did them when he was in the 45th Infantry Division between the years of 1940 and 1945. This is really interesting stuff. It comes in a variety of illustration styles. You can see this one here is, very hard black and whites, while this one here has a bit of zipatone or some other kind of shading style that they translated into a dot matrix printer. I'm not sure exactly how that was done. It was published in 1941, it looks like. So, but yeah, he was a very versatile in style. And these are all sort of one-shot comics. There's no ongoing story, although he does repeatedly draw characters by the names of Willie and Joe. This here is Private Joe. Let's see if we can find you a good shot of Private Willie. It's generally believed that these were based on Mauldin himself and perhaps a friend. The alias of G.I. Joe for galvanized iron had not yet really come in at the time, I believe, at least not when he initially named them. So I don't believe that's the source of the name Joe. It could be. And these comics are pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. Mauldin did not overly dedicate himself to the realism of his figures. You can kind of see that in a picture like this. His faces are all pretty simple. The anatomy isn't, 100%. It's pretty good. But he was very insistent on some kinds of accuracy. Uniform accuracy, gear accuracy. He thought these things were important so that the troops understood they were reading something that was drawn by one of them. I'm not going to try and find it, but in one of these volumes, there's a shot of soldiers marching in the rain, and he shows them carrying them with their barrels pointed down rather than up, because that's apparently how, at least at the time period, possibly still today, I don't know. You might ask your boy Zach, he's actually been an infantryman, but at the time that was how they marched, so rain didn't get in the barrels and foul up their weapons. Also there was, I guess, one comic he did where he drew hand grenades on a belt with the hand grenade spoon facing the wrong direction. And he was deployed at the time. There was no real easy way for them to mirror the image as they prepped it for printing. So he just redrew it because he felt the accuracy was that important. And I always found that to be interesting that he would place the emphasis there instead of perhaps more rendering or more realistic faces, as opposed to some of these very, like this guy has a pretty flat cartoony face. These guys here, not a whole lot of detail, not a whole lot of rendering or hair, and admittedly he was not always in the best places to do this work. He didn't always have a great deal of opportunity, a great deal of time to spend. They were frequently working with very slipshod conditions. Although I don't believe this is from when 1943, February 20th. I don't believe he had actually deployed yet. He didn't go in until Italy, which I believe was later in 1943. He was in the Army for a couple of years before the U.S. officially entered the war. So there's an interesting progression from these early drawings when he was, dealing with camp life and, training and maybe much less harsh conditions than he would later on. I believe this book entirely deals with those early days, and then very late in here you start to see shots from when they're deployed. And I think that one of the great things he does is he manages to show the kind of levity that was important to those soldiers when they were in, their hardest places. You hear a lot these days from people who think that we're in the middle of a great cultural struggle, and they're always, it seems like, in a state of panic, an almost unsustainable one. I guess these are not entirely in chronological order. Anyways, but most of what Mauldin brings up in here is just humorous stuff. Again, he's not trying to craft a big ongoing narrative, but he's not a political cartoonist. He's not, trying to make a point or savage anyone in his most of his drawings, and I think that's important. This was just entertainment. I mean, it went out in the Division News, but most of the time it was there just to entertain, to bring a little levity, to provide some escapism. And I think that's one of the biggest modern takes, is that, this is much more about the day to day. I like this one here, where the guy's crawling out of the foxhole and it just says, "I wish to hell I wasn't housebroke," kind of joking about the day to day trials of being an infantryman in a foxhole. When you're under fire, are you going to go in the foxhole, or are you going to go out? And not only, I'm sure, does that make a lot of sense to the person who is there in Italy working their way north under hellish conditions. It's funny to me. Look at this. When the infantryman looks at the guy, building a bridge, breaking his back, says, "You're lucky you're learning a trade." And then look at this guy. Look at he's weighed down with all this gear. He doesn't have a trade he's going to be able to use in civilian life. Poor bastard. Really, really great. It's just snapshots of life in an infantry division, and a sadly forgotten part of the war. You don't hear a whole lot about the Italian campaign. And sometimes, it's less humorous and more, "Isn't this stupid?" Like this officer is, inspecting him, and he docks him points for not having buttons on his uniform. And Willie or Joe here replies, "Them buttons was shot off when I took this town." Kind of pointing out this officer is clearly much fresher than the infantryman he's critiquing. And there are, it's not that Mauldin doesn't make points. He does occasionally make points. Some of them are quite harsh and got him in a lot of trouble. He actually got called in by Patton and chewed out for a couple of his comics, both of which kind of critiqued General Patton's insistence on smart, snappily dressed soldiers and very rigid discipline. Patton was notorious for these things, and he had a sense of weight and destiny about him. Here you can see them carrying their guns with the barrels down. I found it. This may not be the only comic like that, but anyways, what was I talking about? Right, Patton. Sorry, look at this. They captured a German general with his staff car, and they're driving him off to toss him in a POW camp somewhere. And they're just saying he's pretty sore. He says we didn't even try to catch his orderly. So yeah, he occasionally made fun of officers in general, but yeah, he did have points to make occasionally, but every comic wasn't a point. Like just this guy here asking the doc, "You got anything for lead poisoning?" It's a very kind of gallows humorous thing that's easy to understand. Anyone can empathize with that. And he occasionally makes those more pointed comics, and they come off as very, genuine because he spends all this time establishing a rapport with you over, very simple things. And you can understand how, this normal everyday guy will occasionally, when something he really hates happens, will just rip into it. But that's not who he is all the time. So great writing, great art. Just reading Maudlin's art as it goes on, he does get better. It's very hard to tell these soldiers apart, but the way they are rendered is great. And they do have different facial features. Like, look at these. Each one has a different nose. I've developed an appreciation for how cartoonists use noses to differentiate people. It's one of the most prominent features on the face, and they will really use it to help you tell the difference. Otherwise, you can really have serious same face in your figures. Here's another guy with a good schnoz. And then, look at these gloves. Oh, that's great. So yeah, Bill Mauldin, great man. I believe he won a Pulitzer for some of his comics. Don't quote me on that. And of course, he himself was a veteran. And so yeah, on Memorial Day, for your consideration, if you can find even some of his work, I don't know how many copies of this collected version are out in the wild, but it is really worth it if you can read it and if you like cartooning. They even have like all these notes that will help you understand what's going on. Good stuff. And there is kind of a story, like even follows Willie and Joe till they muster out. And like, look at this. They look like one of them war heroes, Joe. Oh man, even these that aren't really funny are really good. There is kind of a story here. It doesn't have a plot or an act structure or character development. It's just about two guys who, went to Europe and came back. And some of these are funny. Next question: do you wish to remain in the Army? It says here, I gotta ask. Yeah, and none of these guys really look like they want to. So yeah, you can go through and just really getting an appreciation for what it looked like, not from the movie making angle, not from the officer's angle, but from the grunt angle by a guy who was there, who saw it, and who drew it all, not to save it for posterity, but to help his fellow people get through it. And really, if there's a difference between an entertainer and a historian, I think it's that audience perspective, not for future generations, but helping people see their own stories in perspective, really is, for this kind of mass media entertainment that Mauldin was doing, I think really, really good stuff. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you go out and check this out. It's good stuff. It deserves to be experienced by more people. So yeah, that's all I got for today. Hope you enjoyed that. There's a like button and subscribe button down below. Leave a comment if you're so inclined, and I'll talk to you later.